Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome to the In the Lab podcast, a competitive Pokemon TCG podcast. My name is Gabriel Smart, also known as Smart TCG, and I have two fantastic players here who are getting ready for upcoming tournaments. We got Caleb Rogerson, most recently got top 4 at the Vancouver Regional Championships, and also Nathan Osterkatz as well, who most recently won the Vancouver Regional Championships in the senior division. How you doing, Caleb?
I'm doing great, Gabe. Thank you for asking. I've recently just been kind of relaxing a bit, taking a bit of a break from Pokemon after Vancouver. Really enjoyed the trip there, and of course I did very well for my Miraidon deck, so I've been putting out a bit of content about that for people who are preparing for Stockholm and Brisbane. But yeah, I mean, I've been doing great.
How about you, Nathan?
I've been doing pretty good. Pretty much not playing too much Pokemon, but I didn't play any before Vancouver, and I wasn't in Arc Tier, so I told myself I was going to just get to Arc Tier before the format ended. So I played a couple games, got to Arc Tier, and then I played a couple games of Coast Rotation yesterday, but mostly just been chilling.
Nice, gotcha. So was that your second regional win of the year in the senior division, or was it your third?
It was my second.
That's so crazy.
I made finals at one.
Yeah. You also got second at EUIC too, right? So that was pretty good also. So yeah, no, definitely been a really good year for you. So yeah, basically, pretty much to start off, we're gonna go over the Stockholm and also Brisbane regionals metagames. Those are going to be the next two major tournaments that are coming up, and they're going to do a little bit of post rotation. We do have a more post rotation dedicated podcast that should be coming out in a couple of weeks. So make sure to go check that out when it does release. But we have Stockholm, which is going to be the first tournament that we're going to go over today. And most recently, Dragapult was able to win the Vancouver Regional Championship. So heading into Stockholm Regionals, there are two different major variants of the Dragapult deck. We have the one that is used with things like the Monkey Dory, also the Blood Moon Ursaluna, and then we also have the Dragapult paired up with the Dusknoir that Andrew Hedrick used to win the most recent Vancouver Regional Championship. So, in your guys' opinions, which one is kind of your preferred one heading into this event?
Yeah, I mean, I know Nathan has played a lot of Dragapult Dusknoir, so I feel like he should start us off here.
All right. I haven't played at all with the one that doesn't have Dusknoir. I didn't do very much testing for Vancouver. I did a little bit, and there were some changes that I wanted to make to the list after EUIC, just from games during the tournament. But leading up to that, I played no games with the non-Dusknoir version, so I can't really speak on how strong it is. But I will say that the mirror match doesn't actually feel as good for the Monkey Dory version. I will say I think the Monkey Dory is definitely necessary if you're not going to play Dusknoir. I think you just need a way to get damage onto your opponent's board consistently, since everything has more than 60. So you need I know Tord and Milosov played Hawlucha, but I don't think that it's enough damage to last the entire game, even if you throw and reuse it. So, but I don't actually think the mirror match is very favored for the build without Dusknoir. It's felt maybe even a little bit favored for the one with Dusknoir. I haven't played it too much to be able to keep a super accurate percentage on that, but I think it's really close. But having the Dusknoir is just, I feel your deck is just so much more powerful. There's a lot of games where, also not having rare candies, there's a lot of games where your opponent will have a slow start and you can't really take advantage of that. You don't have Rotom, you don't have rare candy, you don't have Dusknoir, you can't just sort of take them out of the game on the second, third turn if you don't have Dusknoirs or rare candies. And I also think that not having Dusknoir makes comebacks not quite as easy, because there's a lot of matchups where if your opponent doesn't go down to one prize, you can win the game with a Dragapult attack and then a Dusknoir and another Dragapult attack on the next turn. But it's sort of not having that means that there's definitely you can go too far behind and not actually be able to make a comeback.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I haven't played nearly as much Dragapult as you have, I'm sure, but I've played a lot with people who test Dragapult. I've tested a lot of the matchup from Miraidon's perspective, and I definitely like the Dusknoir variant a bit more. I mean, I might be biased because I play a lot with Andrew Hedrick, who just recently won with the Dusknoir variant, but I do think that, as Nathan said, the deck has a lot more potential to like make super power plays with like the Dusknoir plus Iono. I mean, the other version, you have the Unfair Stamp, which is one of the biggest draws of the deck, right? You can get an early game like Unfair Stamp plus aggressive Dragapult attack after using Badoo for a bit, and that kind of slows down your opponent. But I feel like the version with the Dusknoir is a bit better just because you can always use Dusknoir plus Iono, even if you're falling behind a bit. More so like that version, you're able to play from behind. The Badoo Unfair Stamp version, you're more so trying to let the opponent out of the game by using Badoo and using Unfair Stamp. And if your opponent can actually establish the threats they need to establish, it feels a lot worse without Dusknoir. So that's kind of my perspective there. I do really like having access to the Unfair Stamp and having access to the Blood Moon or Luna. I think those are great in the non-Dusknoir version of the deck. But I still think the deck just feels a little less powerful overall. And definitely it's a deck that I'm a little less scared of playing against, especially when playing Miraidon, because I don't have to worry about them winning in 2 turns ever. And I can kind of just chill, and even if I miss a turn of attacks, if I'm ahead 1 turn of attacks, I still am able to win in 2 more attacks before they can ever win the game. And so, yeah, I feel like the Dusknoir Iono version of the deck is super, super powerful, and I recommend that deck to anyone who has experience playing Dragapult. I just think it's so strong and just has great matchups across the board.
Yeah.
Another thing I'll say about not having the Dusknoir, and at least the list that I know the Fernandez brothers have been playing and seeing lots of success with, I'm pretty sure it only plays 1 boss.
Yeah, I know Tord played 3 boss in one transistor,
that seems like a lot. But one thing that's like a big benefit of playing the Dusknoirs is it gives you like almost constant access to Gust cards and Counter Catcher specifically. So like you can combo like Counter Catcher with Iono. You can turn all your Arvins into Gust cards. But with the without Dusknoir, you don't really have like control over the prize map quite as much as you would with Dusknoir. So if your opponent sort of like puts you in a position where like you're even on prize cards and you need to have a Gust, it's like very difficult to find the boss, and a lot of times you'll have to use your Luminion or your Force Seal Stone, which are very valuable cards to have at the end of the game, and Luminion is a pretty big liability to have on the bench in a lot of matchups. So that was one thing, at least for the mirror match, or I guess not really mirror match, but like Dusknoir versus non-Dusknoir, is that you can use Dusknoir in a lot of situations just to make it so that you're even on prizes. Like it doesn't even need to like let you take like a crazy turn, but it just like stops them from having Gust. So you can use the Dusknoirs to protect other things on your bench since they can't Gust them. And I think that's really strong.
For sure, yeah. I definitely, prefer the Dusknoir variant. I just feel like I have a lot more, control over the games. I feel like the only control that I have from like the regular Dragapult is like Unfair Stamp and like Counter Catcher trap things. Like you can do like some cool like trap plays like in those like situations. Like the Unfair Stamp is like pretty good. However, I don't necessarily like the deck. Feels a lot more restrictive in a way. For example, the Goldengo matchup, like you could play like the Cornerstone, but like that matchup still feels like pretty rough. I remember watching, Caleb, some of your top 8 game versus Anil, and you got like 4 energy turn 1 onto a Iron Hands, and since he wasn't playing the Dusknoir, he just didn't really have like that like good of a comeback option. Like yes, you do have like the Ursaluna play and like kind of like hope and pray that works, but that play like oftentimes doesn't always work. So it just felt like if the Miraidon player was able to get set up, there just wasn't really a whole lot that that like variant could really do. One of the other cool things that we saw was in the finals, I believe 2 of the games, like Andrew Hedrick pretty much like went and pushed like Lucas like down to 1 prize and took like 4 prizes in 1 turn. And that's like the comeback potential you have, and that's also just like the threat of like the Dusknoirs just like sitting on the board. I mean, it kind of creates those situations, right? And that's pretty much the reason like as to why he won. I mean, like we saw in game 3, he went Dusknoir, Iono to 1, and put himself in a pretty favorable situation. like from that like standpoint, it would have been like pretty difficult, from Lucas to win. So I think that, like the options, of having the Dusknoir, just like makes your matchup spread, I feel like a little bit more like balanced overall. So yeah, I personally like them.
Yeah,
So.
I think to add even more to that, like just thinking through every matchup with Dragapult, like Lugia, for example, is a matchup where I always want Dusknoir, just take out their Archeops and kind of reduce their threats. Say you're against Goldango, like Gabe was just saying, without Dusknoir, you're always going to be behind in the prize trade, basically, and they always have like a chance to recover, even if they miss a turn of attacking. So like you kind of need Dusknoir there to put the pressure on. If you have the Cornerstone, sure, but people have been moving towards the Baby Goldango, which can attack against Cornerstone, so it's not like you're walling out their whole deck anymore. And then even against, like Miraidon, being able to threaten the 2-turn win. Against Mirror, like it's more of a 50-50 situation, like Nathan was talking about. Sure, 100% who's favored, but having Dusknoir, if you can ever get it up, still puts you in great spots. Like if you're in the early game and you can ever Dusclops, that probably is great in the mirror. Just Gardevoir, a matchup where like getting Dusknoir out, if you can Dusknoir and just like wipe their Gardevoir EX plus their Curly in one turn, you're like always winning from that spot. I felt that like the non-Dusknoir version of Dragapult can struggle into Gardevoir, especially if Gardevoir can get like an unfair stamp plus a board of double Monkey Dory. Like you're never able to take out multiple of their threats until they kind of go in. I mean, of course, you could play the Hawlucha, and then like you have like the Hawlucha Alakazam as an option, but with the Dusknoir, you have so much more aggressive potential, and I think that, in addition to the comeback potential, just makes the Dusknoir so great in the deck.
Yep. Yeah. No. Definitely. So yeah. It seems like like all of us agree that the Dusknoir variant of Dragapult is a little bit better, but both of them are still very, very strong moving forward. So hopping into it next, we have Goldango. This is a deck that kind of surprised a lot of people at the most recent European International Championships. Was able to get to top 4 there, and then Lucas Jing in that testing group sent it to Vancouver Regionals as well, and Lucas was able to get second place there as well. So this is a deck that kind of came out of nowhere, right? Do you think that this deck is, actually good, or is this deck just, kind of feeding off a relatively positive metagame for it?
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, I've been looking a lot at the metagame because I've been doing a lot of content on Metafy on what decks I think are the best decks. And I think Goldango is actually a great deck right now. It obviously has some flaws, like the deck doesn't always set up perfectly. Sometimes you get started a little slow. The Dragapult matchup, as was seen in finals, is not like the greatest matchup, but I think the matchup is still favorable for Goldango, especially if the Dragapult player is not playing Dusknoir, then the matchup seems pretty favorable for Goldango. And then, I mean, your matchups across the board are pretty good. Miraidon is generally a good matchup. Gardevoir EX is actually feels like a good matchup unless they're playing like a multiple Bravery Charm build with Drifloon. And then your only kind of unfavorable matchups come in like the Cloth matchup is pretty bad because of the early Badoo pressure. If they Badoo, then it's going to be really hard for you to take 2 prizes, and they kind of first 2 prize cards always. So that is like a scary matchup for you, but that matchup seems to be going down in play a bit. And every other matchup for the deck feels like even at least. Like the Lugia matchup can be scary, but it's still a pretty close matchup, especially if they don't play the Radiant Charizard. So like all your matchups across the board are fairly solid, and I think the deck is like one of the decks I'd recommend the most right now, especially since it's like a pretty fun deck to pick up and play if it's like, oh, it's nearing the end of the format, still have to play either Stockholm or Brisbane before I get to post-rotation. Goldango is actually a super enjoyable deck in my opinion.
Yeah, I think Goldango has been very strong for the last couple tournaments. I think the main merit of it just comes in like you just have a solid Dragapult matchup, and especially if they don't play Dusknoir, and there's not really too much that they can do about it. And like there was the Cornerstone, but as we saw with Lucas Singh, like they were like already pre-pepped for the Cornerstone. They had the Baby Goldango. You can attack with that. You can throw it up, use it again, or Night Stretcher if they knock it out, and just sort of make that Cornerstone just like completely useless. I think Goldango has a very strong matchup spread right now, but part of the one thing that's a little bit scary about it is I do feel like there's a lot of decks, not really Dragapult as much, but I think there's a lot of decks that can justify putting in 1 to 2 cards into them that are like not terrible cards that swing the matchup like a decent bit. Like I think like Miraidon, we saw Azul play like the Blood Moon and the Defiance Band. I think that swings that matchup a lot. I think Lugia can play 2/2 Cinccino. That also swings that matchup a lot. Guardy can play like Fluttermane and Devo. You can play Drifloon, multiple Bravery Charms. I think the deck has very good matchups, but maybe not quite as powerful of a deck, since it's not super hard to just put a couple cards into your deck and make the matchup completely winnable, even if it like was unfavored before.
Sure, yeah. I think that it's very powerful, but the linearity of its deck is like very easily exposed. You know, like I was playing the double Bravery Charm in my Gardevoir build, and I felt like if I got like, you know, turn 1 like TM Evo, like from my testing.
Oh yeah, you got turn 1 TM Evo.
Yes.
Yeah.
I ended up not playing, unfortunately, the TM Evo at Vancouver. I had a deck list there. But if you are, playing the TM Evo, you can, make that matchup pretty good. Because if you go, like, turn 1 TM Evo into turn 2, like, Bravery Charm, they literally cannot bench a Pheasantipede. Like, because if they bench Pheasantipede, you just go push up Gardevoir, attach a Dark Energy, counter catcher KO, and then, like, their prize trade just doesn't work, right? So, yeah, from my testing, that matchup felt, pretty good overall. But yeah, I think that, Goldango's fundamentally really strong. But I think that its linearity can be exposed. So yeah, it's a good deck though. I think it's, definitely tier 1, tier 1.5. Next up here, we got Roaring Moon. What's up?
That's a better way to put what I said.
Yeah. All right. Next up here, we got Roaring Moon. Now, this is a deck that shocked a lot of people at this tournament. Roaring Moon ended up getting top 4. Lee Bowie kind of been known to play some, like, I guess, interesting decks in the past, and he was able to take this event down. This is a deck he'd been playing a long time as well. He'd been playing lots of, cups and challenges in, the Seattle area, and, ended up, seeing a lot of success with it. I've also seen some, pretty notable players. For example, Grant Manley most recently won a 1K. And I think North Carolina, right? And he was playing a very interesting build of the deck. With a bunch of, tools. Is this deck, really for real, or is it just kind of a, fun deck, like at the very end of a format? Because I don't know really like how good it is. It doesn't seem amazing, but I guess, it's, pretty consistent. Is the deck good?
Yeah, I mean, Lei is obviously the Roaring Moon GOAT. So the deck is, I mean, it's all right. Like, it has pretty good matchups across the board outside of Dragapult, but I do think that the Dragapult version with Dusknoir is a pretty bad matchup for the deck. Especially the version that Lei played. It's just like you have Dusknoir and you can always win in like 2 attacks. You're Badoo pressuring, so that the player playing Roaring Moon can't really put on as much aggressive pressure, can only really KO the Badoo even if they are able to attack with Roaring Moon. So that feels pretty bad. Even if they're not playing Dusknoir, they're still playing usually double Badoo plus Klefki, and they have like the unfair stamp, the Blood Moon. I feel like the matchup is still probably not great for Roaring Moon, but I do really like the version Grant Manley recently played. It's I believe a build from the owner of PokeHive, which is like a data kind of X account that goes over like data statistics from recent tournaments. A really interesting account if you've never seen it. They kind of say like what matchups each deck has in day 2 and like how the deck performed into different decks. Really enjoy it. But yeah, I think that deck with the Ancient Hourglass is what it's called, I believe. The Power Glass, something like that. Yeah. So the Power Glass, and you play like a bunch of town stores to search out Power Glass and to search out Forest Sealstone, and that build kind of focused on going first, getting Greninja in the active, and then attaching and Power Glassing to it so you can threaten the turn 2 Greninja attack to KO like double Dreepy into potentially KO 2 more Pokemon the next turn if they can't attack, and even if they can attack, you can go in and knock it out and potentially they aren't able to respond. So I think that build actually is a much better Dragapult matchup. So I mean, I was interested in that build. Played against Grant at the League Cup on Saturday. I did beat him with my Miraidon deck. I got pretty lucky, but He also did get the turn 1 attack for 2 prizes, which his deck is like not built to do as much. I do feel like that version of the deck just not being as aggressive is a bit bad into some of the more aggressive decks like Clop, like Miraidon, like Raging Bolt, but it definitely is better suited to deal with Dragapult, so I think that is a version I would recommend if you're interested in playing Roaring Moon right now.
Yeah, I agree. I think that version's better. You know, I also beat Grant at the same League Cup. Got pretty lucky.
Congrats.
Wow, both of you guys.
Yeah, we kind of ruined this tournament. I got really lucky. I was playing Dragapult. One thing though that does feel like a little bit of a weakness of his deck that I didn't realize until after is that I don't think there's any E-switch, right?
No, it's just
And
like go first,
so,
put the Ninja
yeah.
active and Power
So
Glass.
if they don't get the Power Glass and the energy on the Ninja, they literally can't attack with it on the second turn, which is what happened versus me. He like got the Power Glass and didn't hit the energy or something,
He missed,
and then just like
he prized the Ninja, right?
Yeah, he had the heavy ball. He had heavy ball for it.
Yeah,
he had like 4 soon, but it was just like that feels like a little bit iffy. Like if you with either one of those pieces, but I definitely think the Dragon Ball matchup is probably still favored. I don't have any games with the deck, so I can't really speak on the other matchups. But the Dragon Ball matchup definitely seems a lot better than the other build. The other build is fine. I think it's more consistent and like probably
definitely
better
more interesting at attacking early with Roaring Moon.
I think also probably better into a lot of the other decks, just since like I think the Greninja isn't like a super like there's a couple decks that Greninja is like you want to be attacking with Greninja like as much as you can, but other than those, I think you're probably better into like most of the other matchups. But I don't think the Dragon Ball matchup's good. Like they can like Budu kill your Roaring Moons after. I know one of my friends, Noah Donan, he got top 32. I was like one of Labui's only losses, and he said he just like allocated damage off of something on the bench to the moon, and then Budu killed the moon plus Iono or unfair stamp or something, and like they have like no good response to that, and it's not very hard to pull that play off.
If you Budu early, you already have damage in play, and then you could just move it. And Budu hits for weakness right against Roaring Moon, so if they do 200 itself, then you just KO. With Alexander 20.
And even if they poison anything, or like if they poison their own moon, Budu also knocks it out. So yeah, I think the deck is fine. I think Labui was probably just really good at it, and that was why he had such a deep run. But I think if you're gonna play a deck that loses to Dragapult, it's probably better to like play like Lost Box. I think that deck was just like better into the meta. But I think that there's definitely some potential with Power Glass of Roaring Moon, since the Dragapult matchup seems pretty good.
Sure. Yeah, so it seems like kind of still, I guess, like an underdeveloped deck. Just like a couple of different variants and like have some potential. But cool.
Yeah. I'd be interested in adding one energy switch to the Power Glass build for sure. You have the Secret Box, and then maybe even if you miss the turn 1 Power Glass play, then you can still hit the turn 2 Ninja for sure. That would be kind of my suggestion.
You've also got like the 4 town stores, so like if you really need to, you can also just like force for it.
Sure.
True.
Cool. All right. So moving on here, we got the different variants of the Miraidon deck. Now, this is a deck that you, Caleb, most recently got top 4 at Vancouver, also got top 8 at the Merida Regional Championships, and also got top 64 at EUIC. So you've cashed the past 3 tournaments, cut 2 of them, and then we also have kind of the other variant of what Azul's been playing that has things like the Prime Catcher, doesn't play the Area 0 as well. We also saw Defiance Band and the Blood Moon Ursaluna. So which variant do you think is better and why? We'll probably start it off with Caleb here, as he's the one that's been playing the deck every tournament.
Yeah, well, Miraidon is broken, so if you're going to Stockholm, you should play it. Unfortunately, the tournament was capped by the time I wanted to register, so I can't run it back one more tournament. But yeah, I think the Secret Box build is a little bit better than the Prime Catcher build. I did play the Prime Catcher build to the League Cup this weekend, and I won. The deck's still broken. But yeah, I think that the Secret Box build just gives you a little bit more bench flexibility. Like the Prime Catcher build, you can't play Latias. You can't play... Pikachu goes with the Area 0 package, which is only in the Secret Box build. And then you're not playing... Zapdos either. So what it feels like with the Prime Catcher build is the deck is a bit more consistent at pulling off like Gust plays into decks like Gardevoir and Dragapult, but you lose out on like that full bench play where you have Mew and Fez developed against Dragapult, which feels really good to have like Mew, Fez, Latios on, so that if they disrupt you, you still have all the onboard draw, potentially also an Iron Bundle on. You really don't have board space like that with the Prime Catcher build. And then also you get to play Zapdos, which makes your Archaludon matchup good. You get to have Pikachu, which is really good in the mirror match. With the Secret Box build, you just go first, you push the Pikachu, and you Rotom. But with the Prime Catcher build, you can't really do that because you don't have Pikachu to sit behind. So you kind of have to go aggressive and go for a turn 1 attack. If that doesn't work out, you might just lose. So I do feel like that the Secret Box matchup the Secret Box version has a bit better matchup spread. Although I really like the Prime Catcher build because of the space that you gain. My list for that deck does have a Iono in it, so that you have a little bit of disruption in some of those matchups I was mentioning that aren't as great. I also play a Research now, just kind of cut out some of the fluff. You get a bit of extra space because you get to cut the area zeros. So that does feel like a bit more consistent there. But yeah, with the Secret Box build, I am playing the Defiance Band now, which means with the Zapdos, you can still KO Goldengo. With a Miraidon, you do 220 plus 10 plus 30 is 260. Or with a Raikou V, if you can fill your bench with 8 Pokemon and you're 2, you're also doing 220 base damage. So that makes that matchup pretty good regardless. So yeah, I think that the Secret Box build is what I would recommend. But if you have experience with the Prime Catcher build, I think it is also almost just as good. So either build, I think both are very, very good right now. Matchup spread is pretty good for the deck right now.
I think I haven't played too much Miraidon, but I definitely think the Defiance Band is really good. I think you want some way to have the Goldengo matchup be like better than it is without like anything. I think there's just too much of that deck going around right now. I think you need to have something. I feel like just the Prime Catcher build is definitely like more consistent. You get more slots. You just get an extra out to Gust on turn 1. That's Arbin searchable. It's also pretty nice versus Dragapult, since a lot of times I feel like you're hoping to hit Gust stuff Ionos in that matchup. So you basically, if you don't have to use your Prime Catcher early, you gain 4 outs to Gust, or maybe like 3 because Secret Box is an out to Gust, but you can't Arbin for Secret Box and then Boss. So it turns like all of your Arbins into outs to Gust as long as you have Prime Catcher in deck. So I think that's really good. But I do think that having the potential to just be able to like, there's so many like different cards that are like Rotom, Squawkabilly, Luminion, all these different cards. Like you don't really have bench space to use all of them if you don't have if you're playing Prime Catcher, you don't have Area 0. But I feel like if you have the Area 0, like you can get value out of like so many different cards in your deck, and it's just I think the deck is just a lot more powerful when you have the Area 0. It also like enables like Raikou to one hit stuff. And 2 energies is like pretty efficient attack, so I think that's somewhat relevant as well. But I think just being able to afford to like bench Rotom and Squawk, for instance, on turn 1, I think is really good. Like I think you can get like a 8-card hand and dig through a ton of your deck on turn 1. I think that's really good, and then even still have bench space for Mew and Fez sometimes if you want. So yeah, I would probably recommend the Secret Box as well. Haven't played very many games, but I think they're definitely both strong.
Yeah, I go into a bit more depth about the deck in my guide on Miraidon and Metafire. But yeah, I think that the Miraidon gaining access to the Raikou for 2 energy, as Nathan said, is really, really good for the deck. Especially against Goldengo, that 2 energy knockout with the Defiance Band is super, super good. And against some other niche matchups, like for example, Ceruledge, like against Archaludon, if they have Dialga, with the Defiance Band and the Zapdos, there are often breakpoints where, like, if your opponent benches like 3 Pokemon, for example, against Dialga, you take a knockout there. And so, like, just having that efficiency of the attacker kind of breaks spots where sometimes you wouldn't be able to get energy to win the game in the Prime Catcher build.
Yep, I definitely think the flexibility is nice. Some of the games that I played with 0 area 0, I was just like, dang, I want to bench, like 7 things here and I can't, I think that like also Raikou is just like such a powerful attacker. It's like so many situations, and having the area 0 makes that card, significantly stronger. So yeah, no, I am personally a big fan of the Secret Box build, but I do think, moving forward, I think we all kind of agree on this. The Defiance Band should definitely be played in it. Because even if your prize trade is like 4-4, you can just simply like pop the Magneton and then get use out of that. So there's definitely like a lot of cool things that you can do with the Defiance Band in a lot of situations. So cool. All right, yeah. So seems like the Area 0-1 we're all kind of in favor, but I feel like they're both pretty good right now. Okay, so next up here we have the top 3 decks that you would personally be preparing for if you were going to Stockholm Regionals. So we'll start off with Mr. Rogerson.
Yeah, I think that Dragapult is pretty obvious. I think Dragapult will be the most played deck for sure. I think somewhere around 20% when you combine both variants, the Dusknoir and the no Dusknoir. I'm just going to lump those together as like, I think you should be super prepared for both. I think the Dusknoir one for sure, you should know like how much they can do because, for example, when I'm playing Miraidon, I know one attack off and their damage is placed right, they can win in one more attack with Dusknoir. So like you should know like how much can your opponent get onto your board with damage with Dusknoir, with Alakazam, with all these combo pieces. And so that is something you should be prepared for. Also, if they don't have Duskulls on their board and it seems like they're playing the no Dusknoir build, always keep in mind the unfair stamp. So in some situations, you might want to kind of wait and not take a KO until your board is a bit more developed. But yeah, I think Dragapult for sure is going to be the most played deck in Stockholm. And then I'm between Gardevoir and Goldengo. I think those are like probably going to be the other 2 most played decks. I think Goldengo might be second most played behind Dragapult, just based on its recent success. It's just only been going up in play rate, and it's a deck that people enjoy playing. It's kind of like the Raging Bolt of old formats. Like, of course, the deck is a lot different because you're not turn 1 KOs, but Goldengo is just a deck that people find fun. You draw a bunch of cards, you take big 1-hit KOs, and it's a deck that casual and serious players both enjoy. So I think that deck might sneak into the second most popular deck. But if not, Gardevoir is the other deck that I think will be in the top 3. It's a deck that has kind of been staying a very popular deck across this format. And I mean, it's a deck where, as Nathan was saying, you can include the Fluttermane Devo, you can include the double Bravery Charm. There are ways you can tech your deck to beat Goldengo, and then all other matchups kind of work the same way, where like you can tech your deck so that each matchup is a little bit better depending on what you're expecting the meta to be. So yeah, those are the decks I would be prepared for: Dragapult, Goldengo, and Gardevoir.
Exactly the same for me. Dragapult first. I think Goldengo will probably be number 2. It's been converting really well into day 2 in the last 2 tournaments. Was like second most in this last one, and I think it was like tied for first with, if you're splitting the Dragapult variants up, I'm pretty sure it was tied for first best conversion rate, or at least amount in day 2 at UIC. And it's also been like converting well into Top Cut as well. So. And I think the deck is still reasonably well positioned for this tournament. So I definitely think that you don't really, unless you're playing Dragapult, it's probably not a great idea to have a bad Goldengo matchup. You should probably try and get that matchup to be like somewhat winnable, like 45-55 maybe. And yeah, as Caleb said, Guardy is just like, if you're good at Guardy, you can make a meta call for any tournament. Like, there's just so many different options and cards that you can put into the deck that, you can if you can call the meta right, Guardy will always be a good play. It's like it's very rewarding of skill, has lots of comeback potential. I just like decks with Iono and Counter Catcher are just so good at making comebacks. You can just like bring stuff up and gain back a couple turns really quickly that way. So yeah, I think Guardy will definitely be top 3. And I think there will definitely also be like an increase of the Bravery Charms. Probably more Bravery Charms than Fluttermane Diva. I think Bravery Charm is just a stronger card in general, but I think more of the Guardians will probably be playing that just to deal with the Goldengo matchup.
Yep. Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I think the biggest one to prepare for, definitely the Dragapult variants, kind of I feel like both of them will be like pretty popular. I feel like if Dragapult's like 18%, it'll be like 12% of Dusknoir, maybe 6% of like regular, I feel like, or maybe 13 and 5%. I think like that seems like a pretty reasonable split. And then, I would say Goldengo. I think actually Miraidon makes a pretty good play for this event because I think there'll be people that try and, beat things like Dragapult with, like Lugia, which, I would say that Miraidon does, pretty good into Lugia. So I think that there might be some people that are, trying to beat it. And that makes, Miraidon a pretty decent call. I would probably say it's kind of tied, for me personally between Miraidon and the Gardevoir variants. And yeah, I think that like one of the things that Nathan said is that, Gardevoir can kind of morph into kind of like whatever variant you want. Like you can kind of pick and choose like the matchups that like you want to be good against, like which is like one of like the really cool things about it. I personally agree that the Flutter Devo like package actually isn't as good versus Goldengo as like I initially thought if they know kind of how to play around it. So I felt like the double bravery charm, paired up with the Drifloon just seems, like slightly stronger. The double bravery charm is also very good versus the mirror match because, you can put something like bravery charm onto like your Screamtail, which is, pretty good. Also just like having, bravery charms can help out in like some situations versus like Radiant Greninjas like at the beginning of the game. So it just seems like that, the bravery charm variant of, that seems a little bit better heading into this, tournament. So yeah. Those three decks, definitely should be the ones that you prepare for. So, next up here, we have a little bit of post rotation. I know that, plenty of you watching this are trying to get ready for the upcoming stuff. We got the Atlanta Regional Championships and also the Monterey Regional Championships, which will be coming up in just a couple of weeks. So, how has your testing been going? Have there been, any decks that, kind of have, I guess, like surprised you and just, how has, practice been going?
I'm going to go first, Caleb.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I've been thinking a lot about post rotation. Haven't really been playing as many earlier in the podcast. But post rotation, of course, is super on my mind right now because my next major event is Atlanta. So I really want to prepare for that tournament. Also, I'm going to Monterey. So post rotation, going to be both of those tournaments. Yeah, I think that Raging Bolt is one of the best decks in the format. Based on what I've seen, what I've been watching, the deck is just super consistent. Of course, not as much at turn one attacking as it used to be, but just having the Noctowl to be able to pull off very strong attacks against whatever your opponent's playing feels really good. And I feel like that deck has a good chance against all of the kind of cheese stuff that people are playing. Like, for example, the Walls deck. If you're just playing something like Cornerstone Ogerpon and Raging Bolt, you can kind of get through the walls that people are playing. And just having kind of a strong, consistent deck where you can deal with any threats from your opponent feels really good at one of these post-rotation formats where there are not as many options for people to play. Not really as many techs people can play. They just kind of have to play a straightforward deck. And something like Dragapult really loses some of the consistency tools like Rotom, like Lumineon, like Lance is a big one. So that feels like something where Dragapult is still a very strong deck, but you're going to need to find some kind of way to balance out the consistency a little more. And so I haven't quite found the way that I want to play Dragapult the best right now, but I still think the deck is super strong. I know Ursaluna is now maybe more of a consideration now just because of the walls stuff, like the Melodic EX. Ursaluna is something where you can get through that with combined with Dusknoirs potentially. Just having a way to get through the Melodic / Cornerstone / Farigiraf EX Walls deck is something that's all of my mind. And just a strong, powerful, consistent deck is what I'm looking for the most.
Yeah. I haven't played too much. I did a pretty long testing session yesterday. Initially, I thought that Dragapult seemed pretty good. It still does. I think that the matchup against the Terra Box Tour deck, whatever you want to call it, that had it was like the second best placing deck at the Champions League, I want to say. I think there were like 3
or 3 and 16. It was like 2 or 3.
Yeah. I don't think the matchup is very good for Dragapult. They've got the Water Ogerpon at the start of the game. They can, It's not very hard to set that up. Even if you're using Budu, they can kill your Budu and take out a Dracloak or Dreepy with an energy, which is really annoying.
You can't really get
No,
3
you can't.
Dracloaks.
Yeah, and it pressures your energy a lot because they can also one hit your Dragapult with a Clefairy, which is pretty easy to set if you just got a Crispin. So I think that matchup is not amazing. The Blood Moon definitely helps. There's some things I've been thinking about with Bravery Charm. So you Bravery Charm the Blood Moon, so you can knock them out and they can't Pikachu. But that also just totally folds to Budu because you don't play. I think most of us don't play Turo anymore. Just switch since you can't really find the Turo. So if they play Budu, they just Budu your Blood Moon and stuck for a turn. And then
you might have access to Turo, but you might not have a way to find it, right?
Yeah,
that would be an issue there.
So I don't think that match was great. Dragapult does seem pretty good into most of the other decks that did well. I think Dragapult destroys that Charizard deck. It was the Noctowl Charizard deck that got top 8. I think that matchup was really good. I played it a little bit yesterday. They have no good response to Budu. They have to just kill it, and if they ever kill it, you can just unfair stamp them. You can even Budu again. I'm playing Defiance Man in my list. There was one game where I counter catchered up their Terrapagos, unfair stamped, so they just started Buddy punching for 40 and Buddied 5 times, and set their Terrapagos up so I could just wipe their board with a Dragapult. So I think Dragapult's pretty strong. I think I really like the Terrabox deck, but I still have yet to find a good answer to the Walls deck. You can play your own Cornerstone, but the problem is your deck still kind of gets cooked by Cornerstone. You can't one hit it. You have to attack with Water Pawn or Mew, copy their Cornerstone or your own Cornerstone. But they have Monkey Dories and the Pokevital. So if you try to go in with your own Cornerstone to deal with a Girafarig, they can just load up their own Cornerstone and still be pretty favored in the price trade, I think. So that matchup doesn't seem great. I'm still trying to figure out a way to make that somewhat maybe 45-55, 50-50. But I think just having all the options of the different attackers just makes it so that especially with Sparkling Crystal and Crispin, you can really put whatever you want into the deck. Any 2 energy attacker or Terra Pokemon, you just slot it in there pretty easily. So I think the deck has a lot of potential. I think there's definitely lots of optimizing to be done with different cards and stuff. I know that the 10th place list from the Champions League was playing the Parikarap in it, which is pretty interesting because you can get the baby with Van Rotom, and I think that's pretty strong in mirror match. So I think there's a lot of potential with that deck. Pikachu is the best card of the deck. You just win a lot of matchups with it. I haven't thought too much about Raging Bolt. Question for you, Caleb. Do you play Slitherwing in your list?
I didn't have Slitherwing, but yeah, I mean, it might be good because Pikachu in the Terra Box deck that you're talking about, or that type of Noctowl engine deck. I know that having a Slitherwing, you can kind of just deal with the Pikachu, and then it's going to be hard for them. But I feel like the matchup is already fine for Raging Bolt too, because a lot of the time, it's kind of hard for that deck to deal with back-to-back-to-back threats, especially with Ionos. I know Raging Bolt has easier access to Iono this format now with Tal, and with Iono and Palpad, you can kind of force a lot out of another Noctowl deck. But yeah, I think Slitherwing might be a good consideration for sure.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think the matchup's probably fine for Terrabox if they don't have the Slitherwing. Just I think the price trade is probably pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, you can kind of play around Pikachu not dying, right? That would be your idea, right?
Yeah. You can take 2 prizes in other ways. You can Water Pawn early, you can Blood Moon at the end of the game. But I think if they play Slitherwing, it's probably pretty bad because they get to take 2 with the 1 prizer. And especially if they can leave liabilities off the board.
Probably think from a close matchup too with the Slitherwing, probably pretty favorable for Raging Bolt. So yeah, that might be, especially if Terrabox, that type of deck, seems like it's going to be pretty popular, which right now it does seem like it'll be probably one of them. That does seem like a pretty good idea for the deck, for the Raging Bull deck, to include that.
Yeah, for sure. I think, I think that there's the Noctowl engine is really good. I think that there's like definitely a lot of different decks you can play with that are decent. Like, you can play Charizard. I don't think it beats Dragapult, but it's probably pretty good into the other stuff. Like, I think Raging Bull matchup is probably good. You're definitely good into the Terror Box deck. I think Dragapult's good, and I think Walls is like good depending on where
It's
the meta is.
I mean, I think now that everybody knows that the Wall deck is around, all of like the good players are going to be responding to that by having some good on the spot.
Yeah.
Like, even if a matchup becomes like 40-60 for the deck or like 40-60 for a deck instead of unwinnable, that's still bad for the Walls deck, because now you're hitting a bunch of 60-40s and like a bunch of auto losses because people have included cards that just like beat you instead of like a bunch of auto wins and maybe 50-50s.
Yeah, I think that deck is very meta dependent. I think
it could come back depending on how the list is structured.
I don't think you'll ever see like two tournaments that are like more than a week apart where a Wall will do good at both of them.
Yeah.
I think as long as there's like a little bit of time for people to adjust their lists and get a couple games in with like a couple like tech cards in for the Wall, I think if it does well, people will just put those tech cards in and the deck will just do a lot worse. But I'm not sure what like the best decks are yet, just because I have really no idea what the meta percentages are. Like Dragapult seems like the strongest maybe, and the Terror Box deck both seem really good. I think it just depends on like what other things are being played as well.
Yeah,
Gabe, I know you've been putting out some content on post rotation. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think Bolt is like the most complete deck right now. I think that's like, it's a deck that doesn't necessarily lose a whole lot. So having, like the consistency engine with things like the Noctowl feels, really, really good. So I think Bolt is definitely one of the best decks in the format. It can also just throw in a cornerstone and you turn your stall matchup from being pretty bad into being, pretty good. From my testing, that matchup feels actually pretty decent. I think Charizard is really good. The problem with Charizard is obviously the Dragapult matchup. If you play against Pult, that matchup's just really, really bad. But I do think you actually do pretty well against things like the Terror Box. I tested the Terror Box matchup a couple days ago. As long as you get like one Charizard set up, you can just win the game in 2 attacks. Where like you hit, like you take 2 prizes and then they respond and you just go like Rare Candy, Dusknoir, Briar game. So, from my testing, that matchup felt, totally fine. I think that I know we've kind of dived into the Wall decks. I think that what happened at Japan was like no one was prepared for it. But I think heading into Atlanta, we're going to see kind of like the reaction to, that tournament. And I think that Walls isn't necessarily super powerful because everyone's kind of talking about it now. And that's, kind of like a problem. We saw the exact same thing with, something like Snorlax Stall, where like Stall would do, terrible for like a month or 2 straight. And then everyone would cut the text. And like I remember heading into Stockholm Regional Championships last year, no one was really talking about Snorlax. And then Azul, showed up. There weren't really a lot of techs, that people were playing at the time, and the deck just completely dominated. So I think that's, what's, going to kind of happen. It's just, kind of like a cycle, right? Like where Wall decks are good and then they're terrible, and then they're good and then they're terrible. I think heading into Atlanta, we're kind of reaching a point where people will be prepared. So I personally can almost guarantee that I won't be playing a Wall deck, but I still expect to see, quite a few there. So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts at the moment. One last thing here, and this is going to be about Japanese, tournaments. Now, these Champions Leagues are getting thousands and thousands of players. So, for example, the previous Champions League had around 5,000, Pokemon TCG Masters. So that means these events are, absolutely huge. Now, when it comes to your like preparation for tournaments, do you really take these results, seriously, or do you just kind of view them as a underdeveloped metagame that we shouldn't take, super seriously? Because we have seen some, kind of crazy decks. I think like one of them, like for example, was I think at one tournament a Miraidon paired up with like Regieleki saw like a bunch of success, and then like it never really translated over. But how do you kind of view the Japanese tournaments, and do you take them seriously for your testing?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I'll always look at the results of every tournament, especially a tournament like the Champions League that has 5,000 players usually. I think they usually cap at 5,000, like, because like
Yeah.
usually when I look on the list, they always have 5,000 or they have like maybe a little less. But the Champions League is, I think, are huge, especially for new formats, like for Atlanta and Monterey Regional. I know that I'm looking a lot at the Champions League and the City League results in Japan and kind of seeing like what decks have done well at different City League tournaments, even these smaller tournaments, to get kind of ideas for different ways to capitalize on the metagame. And I think that's great. Although I do trust my own testing more. Like if something comes up in my testing and I feel like maybe one of the decks that did well at the Champions League not that good, then like yeah, I mean maybe it was just good matchups on the day or like good into that specific metagame. But yeah, I think in general any tournaments across the globe it's a good idea to look at all of the decks that did well and kind of consider that even if like in the past you thought maybe that deck wasn't that good, you can kind of revisit it for the new. Maybe this deck is a bit more promising than I would have initially thought.
Yeah, I definitely like look a lot at the Japanese tournaments. I think one thing that I do take into consideration every time is that it is best of one. So, if there's a deck that like one of them does really good, but I'm not seeing any more of them, there's definitely like a little bit of like, maybe the deck is not always going to be like amazing. Since it is best of one, there's obviously a higher like variance. So there's a higher chance that any given deck will like just make a run. So like a random deck, even if it isn't that good. But I think that the meta always starts from like no development. So sure, the tournaments are underdeveloped, but the only reason that our tournaments are more developed is because they're after. Like I think that the Japanese tournaments need to happen, and that before we get the cards, I think that that's the only thing to look at. So I think that the meta only develops because those tournaments happen, and they're definitely very important when you're looking at those. And there hasn't been any tournaments over here, and you're trying to decide what to play.
Yeah. I definitely think they kind of give us like a foundation, of like, okay, like these are decks, to kind of consider. So I think that's, kind of like how like I look at them. I actually like to look at the City League results a lot just because there's so many City Leagues. So like the amount of content like on there, because actually the City Leagues get like pretty decently sized. I know they usually get, I think, around 50 to 60 players. So, I also, kind of like to look at that. And I've seen, quite a few pretty interesting decks, that I think have like a lot of potential. But yeah, I think that the best of one is important. I think they have to go 13-2 to make top 16. But I feel like with best of one, for example, a lot of like turbo decks might see a little bit more success in that format. So I feel like things are kind of skewed in some way and stuff like that. One other thing as well is that if they do tie, it's a double game loss. So just some of like the time aspects and stuff like that, I feel like kind of matter in some senses. But yeah, I definitely like enjoy just reading like a lot of the information. Actually, one of the things that I also really like to do is when online tournaments start up, like with the post rotation cards, I actually like to look at that too, because there's like a lot of people who are preparing for something like the Atlanta Regional Championships, and those tournaments get pretty big right at the very beginning. I know like the late night series events sometimes get like 200 to 300 players, so definitely decent data from there. But anyways, yeah, so that is going to do it here for our very first podcast. And yeah, I'll leave it to you guys to make your shout outs, anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, shout out to Labyrinth, of course. Shout out to FCBC, and shout out to Toys Terminal. And if you want to see more content from me, you can check me out MEMAANC or on Metafy. I put out some content on my Metafy community, Turtwig's Den, for only $3 a month. I know Gabe also has Smart Cafe content. So if you want more content from him, also over there. Yeah.
Well, for me, just shout out to Labyrinth, shout out to Gabe for hosting the pod, and then you can check me out on Twitter and Blue Sky at Ultra NKO.
Yep. And then for me, Smart TCG on all like socials. all of our socials and stuff like that, will be right down in the description. And yeah, thanks for tuning in. And we appreciate all the support as always. And yeah, we hope to speak with you guys again soon. Peace out.